Long time no see. Hello friends, it's me Lucid Lupus. I hope you all are doing well. I know it's been a month since I last uploaded, but I have a brand new compilation for you guys of some older stories that you can listen to sleep, maybe do homework or study or whatever you like. But with that being said, I have a new upload coming this Sunday. I want to thank you also for 900 subscribers. We're almost to the 1K mark and I've been doing this for 3 years now, so this is amazing. But thank you all again. I love you all and I miss you. So enough of my chitter chatter, enjoy the video. Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral. I've been having this dream almost every night for the last year. It's such a surreal feeling seeing the people you love mourn losing you. At the same time, it's also kind of nice knowing that these people care so much about my existence. Obviously, having this kind of dream would be mildly unsettling to most. But I see it as an opportunity to know that, when things come to an end, people will actually care. As of late though, there's been a disturbing part of the dream. I keep seeing this person that I don't recognize. He stands among my friends and family and just seems to loom the entirety of the service. For some reason, I can't place a name to his face, but I can feel that something is off about him. The couple times I've seen him, he always seems to target someone in the crowd and approaches them to console them. He seems so very gentle with them, but when I see his eyes, they seem to have a faint hue, a slight red glow, as he stares at where I lie in my coffin. Now I know most people would just say that it's nothing more than a dream, but I've watched him approach 2 people in this dream. Both people that he's approached have ended up getting into horrible accidents. One of them passed away. The other will never walk or speak again. I know it's just a dream, but how could it be a coincidence that the 2 people the man approached in my dream both ended up where they are? There's only so much that you can equate to random chance. Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral again, and the man was there. He was there during the entirety of the service, and this time, he did something different. He requested to give my eulogy. He stood in front of the entire crowd of people and spoke to them, comforting them and telling them that I was in a better place. This morning, I received a call that my parents and my younger sister were hit by a drunk driver. None of them survived. I saw a news report that there was a fire at a local college in the dorm where a number of my friends stayed. My girlfriend's mother called me this morning to tell me that she had taken her own life the night before. All of them were gone, comforted by his words and lulled into the afterlife. Now, I'm sitting here and waiting my turn. You see, at the end of my dream, after the eulogy, he turned to look at my body in my coffin. He ran a hand through my hair and told me that everything would be okay. His words were comforting, and I felt calm as I watched his glowing eyes pierce my soul. The past 2 years have been really tough, honestly. I say 2 years, but my grasp on time feels foggy as of late. My sister and I graduated from high school, but didn't move on like most normal kids would. There were no part-time jobs, cute prom dates, or thoughts of university. It wasn't so much that we weren't allowed, but a fear of leaving each other behind, and a mixture of low self-esteem. The fear of leaving felt justified when my mother was murdered. Our stepfather had always been controlling and abusive, but murder was something we had never considered. Maybe it was a form of Stockholm Syndrome, I'm not sure. I try not to dwell on the past as it hurts too much. The murder was brutal. I found it hard to believe all that blood came from one person. Admittedly, some of it came from me, and I have the scars on my face as proof. I miss her. I really do. And it makes it all that much harder to move on with my life. I don't know what I could have done differently, but I know I could have done much better. My sister and I were without any extended family or close friends you may call auntie or uncle. The only silver lining was that we owned the house and continued to live in it. It sounds crazy when I put those words to paper, but where else would we go? The house was cleaned by a group of workers in hazmat suits. They reminded me of something straight out of a science fiction movie. You know, when the alien falls from space and they're worried about some new space disease. I guess it's similar, right? Our house was a crash site, and the situation left behind is alien to most of humanity. Sorry, I'm rambling. I don't talk to too many people. Everything had been covered in blood, so we didn't have much furniture. The hazmats took it all. My sister stayed with me in the house for a while, but she mostly stared at the walls or paced the house. I think she was more broken up about it than I was, but I guess we all heal differently. My sister started to speak with me, but our conversations were few and far in between. She would do most of the talking, and I would just listen. I don't know what got into her, but one night, she said it wasn't right that either of us stayed in the house, and she wanted me to move on. It was in her words. Morbid inside, to say the least. She said she could no longer stay with me, and needed to find peace outside of this sad existence. I tried to stop her. I begged and tried holding on to her as she was leaving, but it was no use. She walked out the door and left me alone. I watched from the hallway as the headlights from her car filled the house and signaled her departure. I was left alone. Really alone. I cried for days. I cursed her and myself for staying. I ended up with some roommates that my sister had organized. She didn't even ask me about it. I knew I couldn't pay the bills, but it was my house too. I didn't understand how she could leave me with this family. A symbol of what we had lost and would never regain. Sometimes I just watched them living their lives and imagined it as my own. There was a mother and her daughter who was a few years younger than I. My imaginary life had me as the mother of a teenager. I had so much love inside of me, but no one to give it to. No one loved me anymore, and I think that's why I wanted to love and care for another so badly. I made desperate attempts at building a relationship with my new roommates, but I was just some scarred, emotionally damaged girl with a dead mother who they ignored. And the only positive of having them around was that I didn't need to work to pay the rent. I could endure my solitude without having to fear the outside world. I've been an insomniac since the incident, and didn't sleep all that much during the night. The teenager Michelle never left her room, but she was up all night too. Sometimes I would watch the light shining from under her door and debate whenever I should talk to her. I knew it was late, but I only really walked around the house at night when everyone was asleep. Most days I'd feel so alone that it hurt, but there was a sense of safety in my bubble. I didn't want to add the rejection of my roommates to that list. Eventually, after weeks of agonizing over it, I finally knocked on her door and tried to make new friends. At first she thought it was her mother. I opened the door with a weak smile and opened my mouth to talk with her, but she screamed at me so loudly that I ran away. I should have known better. It was just another tragic story. Someone you'd seen on Dr. Phil, but on display for everyone to point at and tell how brave and amazing they were. How many people would actually befriend that person? Would you go to coffee with a girl who has scars that give the impression they might burst apart at any moment? You'd probably say yes in an effort to look compassionate in front of your peers. But if I asked you in an empty room, the reality would be much different. After that night, the sadness I felt turned to anger. They lived in my house and treated me like I was nothing. I was sick of being alone. I was sick of being like this. I'd never done anything people would deem bad before. I'd never stolen, barely ever lied, and was raised to sit quietly and keep my mouth shut. I had started small with my revenge so I could build up to a grand finale. At first it was small things. I pulled a fish from the fridge and hid it in Michelle's room. For days I watched her try to find the smell. I laughed as she gagged while her mother scolded her for leaving food in her room and forgetting about it. I stepped it up and started stealing things from her room. I'd hide them in my closet and sat with a smug look as she looked for it. I stole the mother's jewelry too, but I flushed it down the toilet. My mother never had nice jewelry, so why should Michelle? Some nights, I'd knock on her door and make scary faces when she opened it. In a sick way, her screams felt like encouragement. Her mother would scream at me to stop it, but she still couldn't make eye contact with me. It was too ugly for her, and it was too late to stop it now. I continued this for months. Don't ask how many. They were scared of me, and their fear felt much better than the rejection. Eventually they hit the breaking point, and I heard Michelle's mother on the phone to the real estate agent. I was ecstatic, and sure my sister would come back soon. If not to stay, then at least to visit me. She never visited me. Knowing that they might be leaving soon, I pulled all the plates they had out of the cupboard and started smashing them. The mother rushed out of her room and screamed at me to stop.
Tired of everything. What are you doing? Get out! Stop! No, you guys just treat me like crap all the time. I'm tired of it. Please stop. This is my house, and I'm done.
I screamed at her as loud as I could to leave, and she scrambled to find her car keys. As I held the last plate above my head, Michelle screamed for her mother, who rushed her out of the door. Admittedly, I had gone too far, but that didn't stop a smile spreading across my face. After 2 days, they returned with a moving truck and a greasy-looking man in a suit. I figured it was her lawyer and hid in my room when I heard her screaming something at the greaseball in the suit. It really confused me. She screamed,
"What do you mean a family was murdered here?"
I'm still haunted by old memories of an ex-boyfriend I dated for only a few months. We met online and lived only an hour apart, but we clicked very fast and started seeing each other regularly. Things were going great for about a month, and then one day, we stopped at my place so I could pack some clothes to go stay at his place for the weekend. We walked into my bathroom, and as I started packing my belongings, I noticed him scanning around my room with his eyes. After a few awkward moments of silence, he began to ask me some very specific and eerily detailed questions. Do you ever move your pillow to the foot of your bed at night and pull your blinds all the way up so you can see the stars out this window over here before you go to sleep? I bet you use this lamp over here the most. It's the only one that I'd use. I was frozen in shock. I just stood there, speechless, looking at him in disbelief. He just described everything I did the night before, and it was the only time I ever rolled up my blinds at night and laid at the opposite end of my bed to look up at the stars in the sky. I told nobody about that. So how the hell did he know? The only thing I could do next was to laugh it off and ask him how he knew, but he just kind of shrugged it off and changed the subject. I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole weekend though, wondering if he had been watching me. I hid my paranoia as best as I could until I got home. But I then did a deep sweep of my entire bedroom, looking for any signs of hidden cameras. I found nothing. I didn't have any laptops, computers, TVs, or security cameras in my bedroom that he could have hacked to spy on me with. I did, however, have my mobile phone in the room, but it was laying flat on my nightstand that night. If he was physically stalking me, it would have been difficult for him to see into my bedroom as my room was up high. He would have had to watch me further away from the forest. And even if that was the case, there were some large trees in my backyard that would have blocked his view. It just didn't make any sense. It still doesn't make sense. I've tried to pass this off as a coincidence, but when I step back and look at the whole picture, there's something not right about him. I vividly recall the first time I ever spoke to him on the phone before we met. We had so much in common. Almost too much in common. From books we were reading to very specific interests, hobbies, and habits, I thought I met my soulmate. Nobody has ever made me feel so alive. He swept me off my feet, only to drop me from what I thought was heaven. He became a different person seemingly overnight. He was a narcissist, and I watched his mask fall off. We had texted on and off for a few years after, but I've since gone no contact. I will probably never know the hows and whys, but I continue to wonder and look over my shoulder. About 2 weeks ago, I heard the trash can next to my house being kicked and falling in the middle of the night. Then I heard the sound of glass breaking, and a rock was thrown at my bedroom window, shattering it. Then I heard someone rushing to a car and begins flooring it, which is why I just started writing this story. It all started since I started using this website called Craigslist. I wanted to buy a new couch for my house, and a lot of friends told me about this site, so I thought why not use it to check out deals for a new couch. There was a sale on a white couch which I really liked, and the price was very good. I will call the couch seller Tom, so as not to disclose personal information about him. I asked him about the couch and he said it was in really good condition as in the picture, and that I could come to his house to pick her up. The address he gave me led to a relatively small house near a forest path. Again, I will not reveal names so as not to violate anyone's privacy. He told me to come to his house around 6 p.m. So a few days later I arranged with Tom to come and pick up the couch. He said I can come, so I got into my car and drove to his house. The house is located a few miles outside a small town. It's worth noting that neighborhood in which the house was located wasn't known to be dangerous. After about half an hour of driving, I arrived at the address. It was a small 2-story house. I knocked on the door, and after about half a minute, a man opened the door. I would say in the mid-40s. The man looked completely normal. He said to come inside and he would show me the couch. I went inside, and the couch he showed me looked exactly like the one in the picture. And Tom also said he would help me move the couch to the trunk of my SUV. Nice guy, I thought. After we finished putting the couch in the trunk, I said goodbye to Tom, and so did he. So far, the story sounds pretty normal, but from here it starts to change a bit. I hopped in my car, and after about a quarter of an hour of driving home when I got to a more urban area, I noticed the vehicle behind me was behaving a little strangely. After a few minutes, I realized he was following every turn I made with my vehicle. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, or maybe we were just driving to 2 areas close to each other. So I did not really pay close attention, but after a few more minutes of intentionally making wrong turns, I realized that the vehicle was not actually leaving me. It was, in fact, following me all this time. Wrong turn after wrong turn. At this point, I was quite concerned. I started to drive at a higher speed. At some point in the ride, with the vehicle still following me, I looked in the rearview mirror again. I noticed that the vehicle was a little closer to me now, and it gave me a little better look at the vehicle and who was driving it. I'm not sure what model it was, but it looked like an old red Toyota. The face was familiar, but I could not put my finger on it. After about a minute of trying to crack why this man seemed so familiar to me, I understood why, and it struck me. This driver is Tom. And he looks exactly like him. I no longer knew what to do at this point, so I called 911 and reported a vehicle following me. And I told them the area in which I was driving in while driving at very high speeds. Sometime later, I saw that the vehicle was no longer behind me, and I guess it was because the driver realized I had already called the police. I parked my car in the parking lot of a nearby shopping center and reported my current location to the dispatcher so they can get to the location and I will give details about the man. Unfortunately, by the time I remembered to open the couch out on Craigslist, it was already long since deleted by then. I felt so stupid. I should have taken a screenshot of the ad straight away when I saw things starting to get weird. The cops came, and I told them about the incident. They took details like a description of the man and my rough estimate of what I believed the car he drove looked like. They told me they would try to find the man. I have not yet received information from the police regarding him. The whole story so far happened about a month and a half ago, but 2 weeks ago, I heard the trash can next to my house being kicked and falling in the middle of the night. Then, I heard the sound of glass breaking, and a rock was thrown at my bedroom window, shattering it. Then I heard someone rushing to a car and they began flooring it. I immediately called 911, but when they arrived, the person was long gone by then. I showed them my shattered bedroom window and then they left. The man has not yet been found. Since the incident, I have started installing security cameras in my house, so that if something like this happens, I can have a video of it. I'm not at all sure if this is related to the incident I had with Tom, the couch seller, but I believe there is a connection. If I receive new information regarding one of these events, I will update them in a new video, but until now, I will stay silent and wait. Now I know this probably isn't going to be seen by a lot of people, but I needed to get this out. I live in southeastern Arizona and have been experiencing some crazy things lately. I'll start from the first encounter. It all started when me and my mom, the only ones left awake at the time, were sitting on the couch watching TV, when suddenly we made out a very distinct female scream. Me and my mom got up and checked on my sister, who was sleeping. Now I'm sure this was just a normal scream, like someone scared someone else. Something like that. But this detail becomes relevant later on. Next up, me and my friend were hanging out in my backyard. My backyard is big and has a small portion of the alleyway, where it's elevated to almost the same level as my wall. Anyways, we had a fire going on in our fire pit and were overall having fun. Till we heard some strange noises coming from the alley. It's hard to remember what noise it was, but it got me and him spooked enough to look around. I got on top of my trampoline and looked down at the end of the alleyway, where a single light post was. I saw a figure standing there. Couldn't make out any features, but could tell they were looking directly at me, and just staring. I got down and told my friend what I saw. He got up, and as well said he spotted the same thing, not moving a muscle. He got down and we decided to ignore it. Maybe it's a person, right? Well, the next weekend I invited him over and he spent the night. That's when things got truly weird. From my room window, there was a blind spot in the very corner of my backyard. Now before I continue, we had a fire going that night as well. During this fire vibe time, we heard a female scream. Now, I'm not one to ignore this type of thing, especially when it sounded from directly in my alley. So home and my friend grabbed a light and jumped my alley wall. To our surprise, there was nothing there. But at the center of my alley, the neighbors' dogs were freaking out. Standing at their fence gate barking and growling at literally nothing, or what we thought was nothing at the time. My friend then suddenly backed up and tapped my shoulder aggressively. He pointed out a figure who was slowly emerging from the bushes on one side of the alley. I shined the light and, I kid you not, a completely pale figure with no facial features or anything at all really, darts across the alley at lightning speed and out of sight. My friend and I, who we will call James, books it back to my house. We ran inside and locked the doors, deciding to call it quits for the night. Not really being able to see what this thing could have been. While chilling in my room at around midnight, we heard a loud thud from outside. Keep in mind, I have a dog, a Labrador who is inside my room with the door closed and locked. James and I look out my window and see a pale face quickly dart from looking at us to hiding behind the alley wall. We grabbed my knife and decided to walk to my room door, where my dog is perked up and staring at my door. James and I bring my dog inside and wait it out. I honestly don't think we slept that night. Fast forward a week later, and I'm riding my bike in a wash at around 7 p.m. I look at the end of the wash and see another pale creature dart across from one side to the other. Physically shaken, I pedal my bike as fast as I could the half-mile back to my house. The whole time on edge and paranoid as hell, constantly looking at my surroundings. I make it home and lock my doors, deciding to just stay inside the rest of the night. Fast forward to the most recent encounter. My friend and I went camping. We were only camping in my backyard since it's big enough, and we had nowhere else to go at the time, since it wasn't really a planned camping trip. We sat inside the tent just listening to scary stories and looking at the fire going inside my fire pit. We then both heard a very distinct knock sound, followed by a legit screech. Loud, but from far away, and very inhuman screech at that. We freak out and James grabs his gun, which wasn't real. It was just an incredibly powerful BB rifle made for hunting small animals. It was the best we had. We walked out, and as I looked up to the elevated side of the alley, I see a featureless face peeking and staring at me. I yell at James, and as he looks, him and I witnessed the creature retreat back behind the wall. Needless to say, we went inside for the rest of the night. Last year, I was living in a small mountain town in central southern Colorado in the Rio Grande National Forest. Super small town. Ute natives were tragically killed in the whole area of the town. I don't usually get creepy vibes when I'm there, but it's definitely weird in many ways. I was in my car at 2 a.m. with a friend. We were parked outside our house looking down the road with only the street light across the street lighting up the area. From 15 yards in front of us, we see a large animal emerge from darkness and catch the light. We started asking each other what it was that was so big. Like the size of a small horse or big deer. It then walks towards us and stands 1 yard away from my door. We were frozen, unable to move while we stare at it so close to us. And I say, "Is that a wolf?" It's all I could think it could be. Tall, completely silver. Looked like a wolf from a movie. As it stands so close to us, It looks up to the sky to the left, then to the right. Then it runs away towards the large cliffs at the back of the town, where the abandoned mines are and a large forest begins. We were stunned, stayed frozen and silent, just for a few minutes until we started laughing. Eventually calmed down and then we went inside, confused as all hell. After that, I told some coworkers thinking how cool it was that I saw a wolf. They all said it was impossible. No wolves have lived there for decades. So I researched. They are right. No wolves have been here for like 40 years, and it would be a miracle if I had seen one, especially a grey wolf. As I look at more pictures of wolves, my memory becomes clear. What I saw was too tall and silver to even be a grey wolf. My friend and I had not forgotten one detail of this story. I'm sure it wasn't a dog. If it was, that's the biggest dog I've ever seen. I remember the world washing away as I stared at its shining fur. It was the most majestic animal I've ever seen. There were chills covering my body, and I could barely breathe. Do you think I saw a skinwalker? Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral. I've been having this dream almost every night for the last year. It's such a surreal feeling seeing the people you love mourn losing you. At the same time, it's also kind of nice knowing that these people care so much about my existence. Obviously, having this kind of dream would be mildly unsettling to most. But I see it as an opportunity to know that, when things come to an end, people will actually care. As of late though, there's been a disturbing part of the dream. I keep seeing this person that I don't recognize. He stands among my friends and family and just seems to loom the entirety of the service. For some reason, I can't place a name to his face, but I can feel that something is off about him. The couple times I've seen him, he's always seems to target someone in the crowd and approaches them to console them. He seems so very gentle with them, but when I see his eyes, they seem to have a faint hue, a slight red glow, as he stares at where I lie in my coffin. Now I know most people would just say that it's nothing more than a dream, but I've watched him approach two people in this dream. Both people that he's approached have ended up getting into horrible accidents. One of them passed away. The other will never walk or speak again. I know it's just a dream, but how could it be a coincidence that the two people the man approached in my dream both ended up where they are? There's only so much that you can equate to random chance. Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral again, and the man was there. He was there during the entirety of the service, and this time, he did something different. He requested to give my eulogy. He stood in front of the entire crowd of people and spoke to them, comforting them and telling them that I was in a better place. This morning, I received a call that my parents and my younger sister were hit by a drunk driver. None of them survived. I saw a news report that there was a fire at a local college in the dorm where a number of my friends stayed. My girlfriend's mother called me this morning to tell me that she had taken her own life the night before. All of them were gone, comforted by his words and lulled into the afterlife. Now, I'm sitting here and waiting my turn. You see, at the end of my dream, after the eulogy, He turned to look at my body in my coffin. He ran a hand through my hair and told me that everything would be okay. His words were comforting, and I felt calm as I watched his glowing eyes pierce my soul. The past 2 years have been really tough, honestly. I say 2 years, but my grasp on time feels foggy as of late. My sister and I graduated from high school, but didn't move on like most normal kids would. There were no part-time jobs, cute prom dates, or thoughts of university. It wasn't so much that we weren't allowed, but a fear of leaving each other behind, and a mixture of low self-esteem. The fear of leaving felt justified when my mother was murdered. Our stepfather had always been controlling and abusive, but murder was something we had never considered. Maybe it was a form of Stockholm Syndrome, I'm not sure. I try not to dwell on the past as it hurts too much. The murder was brutal. I found it hard to believe all that blood came from one person. Admittedly, some of it came from me, and I have the scars on my face as proof. I miss her. I really do. And it makes it all that much harder to move on with my life. I don't know what I could have done differently, but I know I could have done much better. My sister and I were without any extended family or close friends you may call auntie or uncle. The only silver lining was that we owned the house and continued to live in it. It sounds crazy when I put those words to paper, but where else would we go? The house was cleaned by a group of workers in hazmat suits. They reminded me of something straight out of a science fiction movie. You know, when the alien falls from space and they're worried about some new space disease. I guess it's similar, right? Our house was a crash site, and the situation left behind is alien to most of humanity. Sorry, I'm rambling. I don't talk to too many people. Everything had been covered in blood, so we didn't have much furniture. The hazmats took it all. My sister stayed with me in the house for a while, but she mostly stared at the walls or paced the house. I think she was more broken up about it than I was, but I guess we all heal differently. My sister started to speak with me, but our conversations were few and far in between. She would do most of the talking, and I would just listen. I don't know what got into her, but one night, she said it wasn't right that either of us stayed in the house, and she wanted me to move on. It was in her words. Morbid and sad to say the least. She said she could no longer stay with me, and needed to find peace outside of this sad existence. I tried to stop her. I begged and tried holding on to her as she was leaving, but it was no use. She walked out the door and left me alone. I watched from the hallway as the headlights from her car filled the house and signaled her departure. I was left alone, really alone. I cried for days. I cursed her and myself for staying. I ended up with some roommates that my sister had organized. She didn't even ask me about it. I knew I couldn't pay the bills, but it was my house too. I didn't understand how she could leave me with this family, a symbol of what we had lost and would never regain. Sometimes I just watched them living their lives and imagine it as my own. There was a mother and her daughter who was a few years younger than I. My imaginary life had me as the mother of a teenager. I had so much love inside of me, but no one to give it to. No one loved me anymore, and I think that's why I wanted to love and care for another so badly. I made desperate attempts at building a relationship with my new roommates, but I was just some scarred, emotionally damaged girl with a dead mother who they ignored. And the only positive of having them around was that I didn't need to work to pay the rent. I could endure my solitude without having to fear the outside world. I've been an insomniac since the incident, and didn't sleep all that much during the night. The teenager Michelle never left her room, but she was up all night too. Sometimes I would watch the light shining from under her door and debate whenever I should talk to her. I knew it was late, but I only really walked around the house at night when everyone was asleep. Most days I'd feel so alone that it hurt, but there was a sense of safety in my bubble. I didn't want to add the rejection of my roommates to that list. Eventually, after weeks of agonizing over it, I finally knocked on her door and tried to make new friends. At first she thought it was her mother. I opened the door with a weak smile and opened my mouth to talk with her, but she screamed at me so loudly that I ran away. I should have known better. It was just another tragic story. Someone you'd seen on Dr. Phil, but on display for everyone to point at and tell how brave and amazing they were. How many people would actually befriend that person? Would you go to coffee with a girl who has scars that give the impression they might burst apart at any moment? You'd probably say yes in an effort to look compassionate in front of your peers. But if I asked you in an empty room, the reality would be much different. After that night, the sadness I felt turned to anger. They lived in my house and treated me like I was nothing. I was sick of being alone. I was sick of being like this. I'd never done anything people would deem bad before. I'd never stolen, barely ever lied, and was raised to sit quietly and keep my mouth shut. I had started small with my revenge so I could build up to a grand finale. At first it was small things. I pulled a fish from the fridge and hid it in Michelle's room. For days I watched her try to find the smell. I laughed as she gagged while her mother scolded her for leaving food in her room and forgetting about it. I stepped it up and started stealing things from her room. I'd hide them in my closet and sat with a smug look as she looked for it. I stole the mother's jewelry too, but I flushed it down the toilet. My mother never had nice jewelry, so why should Michelle? Some nights, I'd knock on her door and make scary faces when she opened it. In a sick way, her screams felt like encouragement. Her mother would scream at me to stop it, but she still couldn't make eye contact with me. It was too ugly for her, and it was too late to stop it now. I continued this for months. Don't ask how many. They were scared of me, and their fear felt much better than the rejection. Eventually they hit the breaking point, and I heard Michelle's mother on the phone to the real estate agent. I was ecstatic, and sure my sister would come back soon. If not to stay, then at least to visit me. She never visited me. Knowing that they might be leaving soon, I pulled all the plates they had out of the cupboard and started smashing them. The mother rushed out of her room and screamed at me to stop.
Tired of you. Tired of everything. What are you doing? Get out! Stop! No, you guys just treat me like crap all the time. I'm tired of it. Please stop. This is my house, and I'm done.
I screamed at her as loud as I could to leave, and she scrambled to find her car keys. As I held the last plate above my head, Michelle screamed for her mother, who rushed her out of the door. Admittedly, I had gone too far, but that didn't stop a smile spreading across my face. After 2 days, they returned with a moving truck and a greasy-looking man in a suit. I figured it was her lawyer and hid in my room when I heard her screaming something at the greaseball in the suit. It really confused me. She screamed,
What do you mean a family was murdered here?
It was 6 hours or so since his last stop at the gas station, but finally Ted arrived. He had been working and saving for a couple years for this vacation, and he stepped out of his car with a grin. He was finally home. Not his real home, mind you. His real home was back in South Dakota. Here in Maine, just a little north of Sebago Lake, was where he felt most comfortable. He spent many summers here in his childhood. The cabin, which was leased out by his father's landlord, Charlie, was a 2-story beauty set in the woods roughly 10 minutes away from the sandy shore of the water. Grabbing most of his stuff from the trunk of his car, he walked up to the heavy wooden door. Pushing the key into the hole, he bumped hard into the unmoving portal. The continuous heating and cooling of the old cabin throughout the seasons must have caused the door to stick. So he pushed harder and it still did not budge. Turning the key back and forth a few times, he finally booted in hard with a resounding crack. He stepped in the musty living room to see that the door has been barred from the inside. This concerned him. He went through the house turning lights on, looking for anyone who might be in there. The living room and kitchen were spotless, and the hallways leading to the up and down stairs were undisturbed as well. He opened the door to the basement and pulled the string to the light at the top of the stairs. Nothing. As he got out his phone to turn the flashlight app on, he glanced down into the dark void. A shiver ran down his spine. It looked threatening and sad. The light switched on, and he slowly went down the creaking wood steps. Each step was like the bass to the solo his heart was giving. Hot sweat beaded down his cool face as he reached the landing. Something moved. It made him nearly jump out of his skin. He reached for the light to the left of the steps, and it clicked on, painting the concrete walls and earthen floor with light. Ted looked to where the noise had come from. On the wall under the stairs was some gardening equipment, and a rake had fallen over. Feeling incredibly foolish, yet relieved, he looked around. There was lots of old hunting and trapping gear, which made sense being in the middle of nature. On the right side of the basement, where the dirt had not been packed down, was some uninteresting luggage. And to the front where the stairs came down was just a washing machine and dryer. Satisfied, he turned off the light and went back upstairs. Reaching the top, he shut the door, letting the rest of his fear run out of him. He checked the bathroom and downstairs bedroom and found nothing. The top floor was 2 bedrooms, which both were spotless and not even that musty. Ted wasn't one to dwell on things, so he just left it to the owner being an eccentric. Feeling hungry, he went back down to his car. The cooler in the backseat had a 6-pack of PBR, a personal favorite from his teen years, and stuff for sandwiches. Closing the door, he took a moment to admire the land as the sun began to set. The trees in the surrounding woods were bright orange with a contrasting darkness, both blending together to make everything look like it was on fire. Thinking back to his childhood here, he remembered his dad dropping the first pile of logs into the fire pit to the south of the cabin. With a clunk, he stood up straight, put his hand on Ted and proclaimed, "This is the magic hour. Anything can happen." From elves visiting from the trees, to the spirits of the Saco River coming to enact the curse, he'd say with a chuckle. Ted would feel spooky excitement run through him the rest of the night, and the years hadn't taken that. He sighed and went back inside. He walked into the kitchen, cooler in hand, and stopped. The fridge and all the cupboards were open, and then the smell hit him. It was like rotting flesh, and he almost threw up. Moving towards the fridge, he saw the shelves had old food on them. How old was it? Or even what it had been, he didn't know. Wait, were all the doors open when he walked in before? Surely he would have noticed, at least of all that horrid stench. He grabbed some garbage bags from under the sink and began to dump the fridge's contents. He couldn't believe the old man would just leave this stuff here for so long. But he had to be pushing 70 now and probably didn't give a rat's ass. After about 20 minutes of cleaning the fridge, the smell died down, and he could finally stomach a sandwich. He made his favorite, triple roast beef and cheese, and sat down on the couch to listen to the radio. Opening a beer, he flipped it on. Hearing nothing but static, he tuned past a few scratchy country stations and finally found one with classic rock. AC/DC's Back in Black was playing when he downed his beer in two, and then got up for another one. Coming back to the living room, the station cut out. It was nothing but static at first, but then he could clearly hear a girl's voice. She sounded like she was crying or pleading, and he made out the words,
"I'm so hungry."
The static cut back in again, and the song Bad to the Bone by George Thorogood took its place. Ted was beginning to get nervous. He ultimately chalked it up to a strange coincidence, but with the sun barely visible now and being by himself, his imagination was starting to get to him. He took a deep breath and a deep swig, and he went through his bags to get the Sudoku he did when he had free time. He rifled through it, but realized it was in his passenger seat. He got up and opened the door, and his heart leapt from his chest as he rushed back behind the door. In his front seat was a silhouette, just staring at him. He didn't get a great look, but it was definitely a woman with dark hair. He looked next to the wood stove and grabbed the small metal shovel on its wooden holder. Slowly opening the front door, he looked again to the empty car. He knew there was someone in there just a second ago. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he didn't feel comfortable here anymore. He packed his belongings back into his bags, and with a careful glance, he went out to his car. He put his stuff in the back seat and got in to start it. Only his fingers didn't meet his keys. He looked over and sure enough, they were not in the ignition. Fuck! Now he would have to get a hold of the police and report it. Some vacation. He pulled the phone out of his pocket and went to dial the number for the local police. When he noticed the smell, it smelled exactly like that rancid food he threw away. Through the sounds of his own gagging, he heard something else from behind him. A funny sort of crackling noise, like that of a fistful of grass being pulled from the ground. He looked in his rearview mirror and saw something that made his skin crawl. It was the woman again. Her dark hair above shoulder length glistened with something moist. One of her eyes hung limply from her dark bloody socket. Chunks of meat were missing from her face, and where her jaw should have been. A gaping hole ripped from her cheeks down to her neck, and her tongue flapped nauseatingly as if she was trying to speak. His scream tore through his throat in a pitch he didn't know he could hit, and in a flurry of motion, he opened the door, ran back inside, and slammed the door shut. The whole thing felt like somebody was moving his body for him, and he was watching it all unfold from outside of himself. Slowly, he slumped to the ground against the door, his breathing erratic and his hands around his knees. As he felt like he was gaining control again, his entire body erupted in shakes. He began to get a hold of himself and started to stand up. The radio was playing something by Aerosmith, and he went to the couch. Ted pulled out his phone to call the police and noticed it was out of service. Figures, he said as he set it on the end table. He got up and locked the door, putting a chair against the knob for good measure. He made sure all the windows were shut and locked, and went upstairs to his old bedroom. He wasn't going to go to sleep, not after that. but being locked in the room upstairs made him feel a lot better about the whole thing. He kept the light on as he got into bed. There was another radio up there, and he turned it on to a nightly talk show. They were going on about football, not that he cared about what the subject was. The voices just made him feel a hell of a lot better. After a while of his mind still racing, he began to grow bored, which turned into curiosity. His instincts knew better. But he looked out the window into the darkness anyway. The moon didn't provide a lot of light, and he had to squint for a few minutes. The tree swayed gently back and forth, and his car was empty. He saw nothing in the still night, and this made him feel better. Maybe the whole thing was just nonsense. He still couldn't talk himself out of what he saw, but it had been quiet for a while. Maybe he was just imagining it. He trailed off in his mind as he saw a figure emerge from the woods. It was slim, and when it walked, it was in a jerking motion, like it had no feet, and it just gazed up at him. Ted reared away from the window, and he thought briefly about going down to get something as a weapon. But there was no way in hell he was going to leave this room. He was just going to sit up here and wait for the morning, then run to the nearest house. He thought as the power went out. His pulse raced as the dark and quiet set in, almost as perfect as the woods during the magic hour. He swallowed dryly in his throat as he listened to anything coming from downstairs or outside. Tick, 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 he heard. The sound of something dripping, coming from the bathroom to the left of the room he was in, and the door was slightly open. He turned on his flashlight and slowly turned to it. He opened the door all the way, and the light revealed the tub. The shower curtain was closed. He could hear the steady ticking coming from it. He moved forward to push the curtain aside, then thought better of it, and pulled away as the curtain ripped open from the other side. There was an old, fat man in the full tub full of water, looking at Ted with hatred. That was when Ted recognized him as the landlord, Charlie. The swollen body rose out of the water and moved in an unnatural way towards him, falling as he reached a large leg over the edge of the tub. Ted backed out of there and out of the bedroom to the downstairs, which he nearly tumbled down as the lights came back on. He grabbed a fire poker and sat on the couch, shivering, just waiting for the waterlogged corpse to come down after him. Nothing came. He crept back up the stairs, moving slowly, ready to bash it in with his iron weapon. At the top, he looked in the bedroom. There was nothing, but he still heard the tick-tick-tick coming from the bathroom. Slowly, he moved to open the door. Water flooded the ground, but the curtain was shut. He moved the tip to the fabric and swung it open to reveal nothing. There was no body, or even any water. The faucet was just open enough to allow a stream of droplets to tap the drain. He made his way back downstairs to the couch. I'm going crazy, he thought. Am I losing my mind? He gently rocked himself back and forth when he heard the door creak open. Suddenly, he remembered he left the back door unlocked. He jerked his head down the hall and saw the dark shape of the woman. He could hear her joints crackle with every move she made, and she made a disturbing noise from the hole in her neck. Her flailing tongue punctuating every noise with a moist smack. Every step let out a sickening thud from her feetless legs, and she was coming closer. Panicked, he turned to run out the front door, only to find it blocked by the former landlord. With an angry sneer, he charged at Ted. Ted stabbed the poker into his stomach with a wet squelch, and like a hole in a barrel, dark water began pouring out. Ted's ways out was blocked. He ran to the basement stairs, locking the door behind him. He quickly made his way to the bottom and turned on the light. He was now royally screwed and weaponless. He went over to the hunting equipment. Most of it was just basic supplies, nothing of any real use. But now, he noticed the rust color in the bear traps was also on the earthen floor. The wavy patterns looked like it made its way back to the darker part of the ground. He followed it, and as he bent down, that's when he heard a creak from the other side of the room. His head moved over to the lower outside window from the back. It was open, and pushing through, it was the jawless woman. He crawled through and fell limply to the floor, unmoving for a moment. Then, in a grotesque display of rigor mortis consumed limbs, she stood up and walked over to him. He had nowhere to go. Above, he could hear Charlie slamming against the door, demanding entrance. Slowly, the horse set in as she is now 5 feet away. Her hands came up, and he closed his eyes, letting out a whimper knowing this was the end. Cold, stiff hands made their way on either side of his face, and he saw a vision in his head. A woman was being held in the basement. She tried to run, so someone broke her ankles using bear traps, and then cut them off with a saw when they became infected. Then the scene changed to her begging for food. She had not eaten in a while and was looking gaunt. A man was tired of hearing this, so he ripped her jaw right from her, killing her. The man was Charlie. Suddenly, he snapped back to reality, and the woman was nowhere to be seen. Banging could still be heard from above, and he looked down at the uneven earth. Grabbing a shovel, he began to dig. The banging became even more desperate, as only about a foot down, he saw the decaying face of the woman. All at once, the banging stopped. He finally lost his supper from the smell and went hesitantly to the top. Charlie was nowhere to be seen. All was quiet. He ran to the front door and threw it open. The cold fresh air felt amazing, and as he reached in his pocket for his phone, he found his keys. Not thinking twice, he got in his car and drove away. The next day, police and a crime scene unit were all over the property. They determined Charlie had kidnapped a young woman named Carol Burns. He kept her down there as a slave, and eventually, when he got bored of her, he found new interesting ways to torture her, eventually killing her. They weren't sure how Charlie's body made its way into the well in the back of the house, so it was labeled a suicide. Ted wasn't found guilty of anything, other than being a loony to most of the officers he talked to. They marked the case closed, and all the loose ends had been tied. All except the small, round bloody marks leading from the back door to the basement. I was a police officer investigating a missing person, and it was the worst case of my career. This series of supernatural events I'm going to recollect to you has been kept extremely confidential and non-disclosed for a good 15 years. I was involved with this particular case back when I was a rookie, only being a police officer for about 1.5 years. All areas and people I will refer into this will have their names changed to protect their identity as well as my job. The first time I was introduced to this case was when my partner and I were called out to investigate a missing person. This person, who I'll refer to as John, was a camp host for one of the campgrounds in the local forest, which was part of our district. The person who reported him missing was a middle-aged woman who worked at the lodge. We asked her a few basic questions, such as how long he had been missing, which were about 2 days, and how did she know he was missing. She told us that he would always come into the lodge for a pack of cigarettes each morning, and had been doing that for the past 2 months. So when he didn't come for 2 days in a row, she became suspicious. I then asked her how he acted, and her response intrigued me. At the time when she said, John was the quiet type, not saying much to anyone other than an occasional hello. He never bought food or supplies here, and I didn't find out why until one day I offered him a free gallon of milk that was about to expire the next day, and he gave me a disturbed look, as if I was trying to give him poison. I soon figured out that he didn't trust food that he didn't make or kill himself. He was extremely antisocial, and I wouldn't be surprised if he went off to live in the woods by himself. She answered a few more questions pertaining to the case, but nothing that I need to inform you about. Soon after we finished questioning her, we went to go check out the campground he was in charge of, which was only 5 miles from the lodge, but on a winding dirt road that went up on the side of a mountain. When we first arrived at the campground that John was in charge of, we noticed something. We noticed that it had not been well kept and maintained. The fire pits were full of ashes, and the bathrooms looked as if they hadn't been cleaned for months, with many different substances and graffiti coating their walls. After we surveyed the other campsites and introduced ourselves to the families who were camping there, we went to visit the men's trailer, which was isolated at the end of the loop. Surprisingly, his campsite was clean and had been taken great care of. It was when we entered the men's trailer though, however, that the smell hit us. It stunk so bad that I expected to find his corpse running away, but his body was nowhere to be found. I tried to turn on the lights to see better, and they flashed on for a fragment of a second, but quickly went out. That's when I realized that the smell must have been coming from the fridge. Everything inside must have spoiled due to the power being out. I went over to open it, but I wish I never had, because when I did, the gust of wind that came within it literally caused my eyeballs to burn. Being blinded for a moment, I bent over and rubbed them frantically. My partner came over wondering what was wrong, when his eye caught what was in the fridge. "Oh man, that's disgusting," he muttered as I lifted my head to see what he was looking at with my bloodshot eyes. There in the fridge was the carcasses of a squirrel, a few birds, and lastly, what looked like chopped up pieces of deer that still had the fur attached to it. Everything was rotting away, and the flies that lingered in the trailer swarmed the fridge, which my partner, who I'll refer to as Daniel, quickly shut. We briefly looked around to see if there was any evidence that could give us a clue of what happened to this man. Right before we were about to leave, I saw the edge of what looked like to be a book poking out from underneath the mattress. I grabbed it and walked out the trailer to escape that dreadful smell that still had my eyes watering. The book felt cold in my hand, even though the sun was blazing. Upon opening the book up, I felt the world around me seem to stop as the wind came to a halt. Even the birds stopped chirping. "Do you feel that?" Daniel asked me as he looked about. "What?" I replied, wondering if he felt the same silence that I did. "Can't really explain it, but I feel as if something or someone's watching us," he said as he twisted his head about. I don't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but then I felt the same eerie feeling. "Yeah, and did you hear everything go silent?" I asked back, wondering what was going on. "Uh-huh. Let's report back to the chief and get out of here," he said while walking back to the vehicle. We then heard a raspy whistling cutting through the silence that caused us to quicken our pace, trying to leave the area as fast as we could. Glancing at the book in my hand, I wondered what to do with it. I supposed to turn it in as evidence, but decided to hold on to it for just a bit before I turned it in. I was honestly curious to see what type of book this guy had, because of how unusual he seemed to be. Looking back now, I wish I would have just turned it in as evidence, because what I found inside was sickening to the very core. While my partner Daniel drove us back into town, I started to read the book, which I soon found out was actually the man's journal, due to how everything was handwritten, and some pages had illustrations. It was all unsettling, and off the bat, I could tell that this man had some demons lurking inside of his head. I will go into more depth of what was written and drawn in the journal later on, but as of now, I need to state that if the chief of police that's over my department ever found out that I stole this journal and then disclosed the detail of this case online without prior consent, then I could risk losing my job. So I hope no one recognizes this, because this case involves so many people whose experiences and testimonies of what happened will be shown. Anyways, when we got back to the station, we had already reported everything we found out about this man over the radio, and they were able to properly ID him. The strange thing is that they didn't have much on him since he's been out in the woods for so long. He had only one living relative left, and that was his mother. The only thing that they were able to pull up under his name was that when he was 13, he had accidentally burned down his parents' house during the night. Due to unknown reasons, one account states that he said he was performing a ritual of some sort. Satanic or not, this missing person was unlike any person I had ever investigated since. Continuing with the main subject matter, this case involving the camp host has been by far the most mysterious and gruesome case that I've ever investigated. Everything that had happened up until the point of when I stole the journal was only the shallow part of this story, but little did I know that I would soon find myself in the deep end of the pool. What we found out there could cause any sane person to have a mental breakdown, so I'm not going to drop it all on you at once, but rather spoon-feed it. This was only the beginning of a nightmare. I was a police officer investigating a missing person, and it was the worst case of my career. This series of supernatural events I'm going to recollect to you has been kept extremely confidential and non-disclosed for a good 15 years. I was involved with this particular case back when I was a rookie, only being a police officer for about a year and a half. All areas and people I will refer to in this will have their names changed to protect their identity, as well as my job. To continue after the first part of this story, I'm going to be showing the account we received from one family in particular who was staying at the camp when the camp host supposedly went missing. This conversation was then recorded and then transcribed as shown below.
Did you notice anything strange before the camp host went missing? Such as, did you see anyone else roaming around this campsite or anything suspicious like that? Well, when we first got here, we tried to introduce ourselves to him, and he just ignored us until we left. He seemed mentally unstable and unfit to be maintaining this campground, and was often whistling with a raspy, uneven tone, which got annoying when we were trying to enjoy the sounds from nature. Also, one weird thing was that during the middle of one of those nights, we heard something like hammering coming outside of our tent. My husband went to investigate and found the camp house chopping firewood next to a roaring fire. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. That was the last time we saw him, and there were many other strange things that went on during that night. Did he seem intoxicated at all during any of this? Maybe he was unstable. We tried to avoid him the best we could, so we aren't exactly sure if he was drunk or anything like that. I see. Is there anything else you guys saw that we should be made aware of? I don't know if this pertains to the case, but I went hiking with my younger sister up the side of the mountain over there. And while we were hiking, we found something. What did you find? Well, you see, I'm not exactly sure what it was, but someone had definitely been doing something up there. Describe it, please. We found a patch of trees that had bones strung up on their branches, as if someone had tied them to it. In the middle of this patch of trees are rocks that were placed in a strange circle type thing, and in there was a straight stick that held what looked to be some animal skull. Around the circle posted on trees were pictures of people.
I'm going to stop at this point in the interview because he had many questions that were not essential to know. But what the teenage son had hiked in on was what we investigated next. By the time we were interviewing these people, search and rescue had gone out into the forest, but never found him. They did find some random cigarette butts mixed in with the dirt, which tied back to him buying a pack of them a day from the lodge, so they thought they were close to finding him. However, they still couldn't trace exactly where he went. While search and rescue were doing this, my partner and I were in charge of investigating the place that the teenager had described to us. When we finally found it, based on the description of how to get there from the boy, we took pictures of the area. It was a strange place, and the random picture of people posted on the trees, all angled to where any one of them could be seen if you stood in the middle of the rocks. I examined the photos trying to see if I recognized any of the people when Daniel said, "Isn't this that little girl who went missing in the woods last summer?" Walking over, I examined the picture, and I matched that photo which our police department put in the newspaper, wondering if anyone had seen her around. Yeah, that is the girl. But why would someone put her picture here? It just doesn't make any sense to me. You don't suppose that these all are pictures of people who've gone missing? Daniel asked as he looked around. Only one way to be sure. Let's take a picture of each one and send it back for analysis. Maybe this is some weird shrine someone created, or it could be a trophy shelf of someone's victims. Who knows? We might just soon find a picture of the man we are looking for hung up on one of these trees. I responded while brushing my stubby beard. Daniel agreed, and we photographed and documented the area. While we sent this information in, I decided to read some of what was written in the man's diary that I had taken from his trailer. It was a random, disturbing segment in a page from it, and it goes as follows. I need to appease it somehow, but I can't. It's following me everywhere I go, and there's damn near nothing I can do about it. Every time I feel it get close behind me, I dart around and nothing's there. I see people in the camp smiling and having the time of their lives, not knowing of the evil I have just done. This is what I couldn't understand in this man's writing at the time, was that he seemed as if someone or something was trying to get to him, but there was no evidence proving that this was true. There was no forced entry into the man's trailer. It was as if he had just vanished without a trace. Later, Daniel and I were notified about who the pictures were of, and the answer was mind-boggling. Every single one of those people had gone missing in that forest area, ranging from 20 years ago, all the way to the present day. Either someone was being insensitive and made this, or this could be a trophy case of someone's victims, whose deaths are all blamed on going missing in the woods. All I knew at the time was that this case began to grow far past than just a simple missing person. Sometimes one person's perspective is completely different from another, even if they both are observing the same thing. That is one rule I learned while being a police officer. Always be prepared to know that you aren't prepared at all. This series of supernatural events I'm going to recollect to you has been kept extremely confidential and non-disclosed for a good 15 years. I was involved with this particular case back when I was a rookie, only being a police officer for about a year and a half. All areas and people I will refer to in this will have their names changed to protect their identity, as well as my job. For this post in the series, I'm going to read another submission from the Missing Persons Journal that at the time of when this occurred gave me more insight on what truly happened to him. But still, there lingers mystery in the crevices. John's journal entry a month prior before going missing. My mind spins at the possibility of what I can do now that I've finally found the ingredients needed. I write this in here as my heart races with excitement of the powers I will soon possess. Oh, the things I'll be able to do when I gain the strength of 10 men. However, this ritual is still unclear and could backfire terribly. But I will obey the rules given and not cross any boundaries or lines. My life depends upon it. Next entry was the night before he supposedly went missing. What have I done jumping into something so stupidly? Having people around and to be caught off guard as I was. The ritual was going perfectly until the camper came to complain about me chopping wood in the middle of the night for the fire. He slowed me down, so I wasn't able to place the piece of wood into the fire at the exact time for everything to work properly. And now, I've unleashed a shadow beast into these woods. One made up of human misery and death, born from flames who could only die by the same. But as soon as it arose from the flames, it humanly darted into the woods, escaping the words I tried to mutter out to cease it from existing. But now, there's nothing I can do to stop it. Its hunger and thirst for blood and a host is unquenchable. I know soon that it will come for me, but I will only be the first of many. If I do not write again, then I bid this cruel world farewell. This was the second to last entry in the journal, but the last one I showed you in the previous post where he wrote about being followed. So furthermore, these are some of the last sentences he's ever written. That thing isn't trying to kill me, but I have no idea what it wants. It wanders close to me at night, out of sight waiting for me to let down my guard. But it could have killed me many times already, but it hasn't. And I truly don't know why. The only thing I can imagine is that this thing wants to get inside of me, possessing my body and gaining complete control of my actions. Soon after, it would commit the most heinous crimes that anyone could imagine. If this would happen, it would probably destroy the shrine I made to pay respect to the ones who've gone missing to the wandering spirit I unleashed into the same forest about 20 years ago. All of those people died because of me, and I fear that if I don't maintain the shrine, then they will come back to haunt me. I have dug myself into a hole too deep to get out of, and now I will pay the consequences. If someone finds this journal after I die, then you need to understand this. That thing won't rest no matter what. It can only die by fire. Torch the forest for all I care if that's the only way you can kill it. Also, if I end up missing, whatever you do, don't go looking for me, because it won't be me. After reading that last sentence for the first time, my blood ran cold, but my young instincts kept reminding me that most of the things this guy wrote in his journal didn't make any sense. Such as one of the pages had nothing but gibberish scribbled onto it, with pictures of a human goat thing with a long snake-like tongue. So I took everything he wrote with a grain of salt. In general, the book as a whole just gave me bad vibes every time I held or dealt with it. After I finished reading through it and trying to understand everything this man was talking about, I slipped the journal in with other evidence involved with this missing persons case. No one even noticed it because this forest was known to often have people go missing, which meant that cases like this one weren't a priority. However, All of the people gone missing made me think about when John wrote about releasing a wandering spirit into the woods, and he made that strange shrine that the teenagers stumbled upon to try and appease the spirits of the people who were killed by it. In my entire life, I never would have thought that something this dark could occur in my hometown where I spent a majority of my youth, playing in these same woods, because there was not too much else to do in a small town like this one. Being involved with this case made me never want to do anything in the outdoors again, because who knows what's lurking out there among the trees. All of this seemed so crazy to me at the time, and the time and effort put into this case was all meant to find a lunatic who believes in conjuring spirits and gaining powers through rituals and other strange things like that. Again, I was a young rookie at the time, and now I fully understand that there are things in this world which are best to be left alone and untouched. Because for all you know, you could be getting yourself into trouble with a much deeper force than you could possibly imagine. Like John did. The next post will be my last of this personal story of mine, because I fear that my coworkers and other people I haven't told you about yet will catch on to this and know it was me who disclosed the information to the public. My friends and I used to play with an Ouija board when I was around 10, 12 years old. Not obsessively. It was just fun to do when we were bored to see what would happen. We probably used it on 10 to 15 occasions before my mom found it in the house and told me to get rid of it and to stop messing around with it. I was unaware of how serious of a concern this had been until she confronted me. So I have two stories that what I truly believed stemmed from using that board. We had taken the board to a neighbor's house one evening, myself and about 6 other kids while their parents were away. We sat in an upstairs bedroom with the light off and waited to see what would happen. After asking if something was with us, the planchette slid to yes. A friend immediately asked a provocative follow-up question, but nothing happened. I honestly remember feeling this huge weight on my chest waiting for a response, and something seemed wrong. My friend asked the same question again, and immediately, a light in the hallway flickered, and his cat sprinted into the bedroom on the fritz, howling loudly and sprinting back out of the room. We all freaked out and put the board away, trying to laugh it off. But I sensed that each member felt the way I felt, that something went very wrong. As for this next instance, I have tried to make heads or tails of it for 15 years, trying to rationalize it in some way, but without success. It bothers me to this day, and something that I've only told a handful of people. This occurred after the board was disposed of, so I was probably around 12 or 13. It was a weekend, between 9 and 11 a.m., and I was home alone taking a shower. As I turned off the faucet, I could have sworn that I heard mumbling at a distance, like I had left the TV on in the living room. After remembering that I had not been watching TV, I assumed that perhaps some friends had come to the front door, talking among themselves while waiting for me to answer. As I tried to listen closely to associate the sounds, I could have sworn to have heard something whisper my first name at a decibel that was almost easy to miss. As I processed what I had just heard, a light bulb fell and shattered across the floor. Shocked, I looked in the mirror, screaming as I fumbled my way out of the bathroom, avoiding shards of glass, and ran out of the front door with nothing but a towel around my waist. This is when I realized that the living room TV was not on, and that my suspicions about friends waiting at the door were false. I waited outside in my towel for a significant period of time until my mom got home from work. Over the years, I had wondered why this happened. Maybe an earthquake that I didn't feel perhaps. But until recently, I had forgotten about my dealings with the Ouija board. I can't formulate any other explanation in my head. I don't know whether or not the board had something to do with it. So one Halloween night, a friend and I were about to go partying. We decided to go to the store first as I had an item I needed to return. We go to the line. In front of us is an older lady and her husband. Her husband was facing the other way, but she was facing our direction and noticed us as soon as we got behind them. Immediately, she started staring at me, eyes boring into my soul like I was some kind of demon from hell. Almost like we had met before and had a score to settle. Up and down and directly into my eyes the entire time until it was their turn a few minutes later. It honestly kind of felt like she wanted to attack me. Her husband or whoever he was eventually noticed, and it seemed like this was a common thing for her. Like he was just embarrassed and waiting for it to be over. Even when it was my turn, I felt her staring at me from the next cashier over. Her eyes were glued on me until I left. The cashier noticed as well. I'm not sure what it was about me that made her do that, or what she was thinking. I'm sure she just had a psychosis episode or something, but still, it was creepy. I was wearing maroon pants, which is the only thing which might have been unusual. But besides that, it was still a mystery. This happened to me maybe over a week ago. I recently moved from a city to a more suburban area, and at the end of my street, the paved road transitions to a dirt path that goes through the tree line of a wooded area. It's kind of bizarre, because while the area is suburban, there's a pretty lively town center pretty close by, so this place sticks out like a sore thumb. During the day, it honestly just looks like the street ends where the trees start, but it is a fully functioning road. At night, it looks like a wall of black. There are no streetlights in that direction. There's a highway nearby that you can see through some of the trees, but other than that, just darkness until the end of the road. This is where I bring my dog to do his business. Now, in the city, taking the dog out at night was never particularly creepy. You get some weirdos out at late hours, but for the most part, it's lit up well enough. There were always noises, and apartment buildings had lights on. This is a complete 180 from that. Complete and total darkness. There are signs all over the property that discourage tenants at my new place from taking their dogs out on the grounds. That doesn't stop people anyway, but I listen because I'm a new tenant, and I don't want to get on the wrong foot with my landlord. So I take him through the pitch-black forest path at night. Most nights, you hear the occasional rustling. Sometimes my dog likes to perk up like he sees or smells something in the bushes, but it's business as usual. One night, I take him out a little later than usual. I'm not worried. I haven't run into anyone at all during my night walks with the dog, and I thought it would be no different this time around. We get walking down the path, and at the end of the road, there was a silhouette. I get a little weirded out. I can't make any physical features out other than them wearing dark clothing and a hood. My dog parks up at the side of the person, and we wait in the path, completely surrounded by trees and brush. Paranoia starts to get the better of me. This is a perfect setting for an ambush. I don't know who or what could be in these bushes, while I'm distracted by the first person I've ever seen on this road. The other strange thing was that they seemed like they weren't moving. Like at all. They were positioned at the end of the road, just looking in on me and my dog. My instincts start to kick in at this point. I truly did not feel safe, and I booked it with my dog running back in the direction that we came, looking back to see if we were being followed until we got back to my street. As we were rounding the corner back toward my building, I saw the silhouette again coming out of the darkness and onto the street. I didn't want to stick around and see what they were up to. In reality, they were probably just as spooked as I was and just wanted out as fast as possible too. Who knows? Anyway, just a dumb little encounter I had that sort of creeped me out.